and welcome to Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a new podcast from Auticon, a global IT consultancy whose consultants are all autistic. This brand new series is designed to help raise awareness of what it means to be autistic through fascinating conversations. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant, each episode will feature interviews with leading voices on autism, including figures from the business world, autistic social media influencers, and autism academics alike. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodiverse talent, through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults navigating the workplace. All my 4 children are neurodivergent, so this is a subject very close to my heart. I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and hopefully learning some new things along the way. I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the show. This time on Autism in Conversation with Auticon, we'll be talking about how to boost neurodiversity in the workplace. In this episode, we'll talk about the common barriers that often prevent businesses from accessing neurodivergent talent, as well as hearing from those who have successfully implemented changes in the workplace to create a more inclusive environment. Now, joining me today are Ruth Rainbow, Senior Resourcing Manager and Neurodiversity Network Lead at Virgin Media, Sarah McMullan, an advanced Python developer and IT consultant at Auticon, and autistic speaker, consultant and social media content creator, Connor Ward. Welcome to you all. Now, first and foremost, it's probably good to explain a little bit about exactly what we mean when we say things like neurodiversity or neurodivergent and diversity and inclusion. Connor, you work with businesses to help them better understand autism. So can you talk us through some of the key terms that we need to know?
Well, of course, diversity is the presence of difference. And we look at neurological diversity, which is often shortened to neurodiversity. The concept that different people have different brains that interact with the world and process the world in different ways. These people, so me being autistic, I am neurodivergent because I am different from the vast majority of the population, which are neurotypical. I like to think inclusion to me, my own personal definition, is nobody should be at a disadvantage for factors beyond their own control. People should only be disadvantaged by things that, they're purposely doing, etc. We should all be given an equal starting point to be able to succeed and thrive in whatever we choose to do.
Yeah. And in the work that you do as a consultant, what do you come up against in that work? What kind of challenges are there? So
I thought I'd be going into it, and I thought the problem would be attitude. I thought it would be people being not willing to learn all this stuff. But it's literally just comes down to, most of the time, the fact that people don't have the knowledge in the first place. Because we're not brought up to understand what neurodiversity is. Even me being diagnosed 5 years ago, it was only a few years after that I first heard the term neurodiversity. The other problem that we have to deal with, though, is the fact that any historic knowledge about neurodiversity has normally been very medical based. It's normally been there's something wrong with this person, they're full of loads of deficits, which of course is not what neurodiversity is about. That's all about celebrating the fact that people are different and that's okay.
Yeah. And we love that. Thank you. That's wonderful. Now, how do you think the world has changed when it comes to understanding diversity and inclusion over the last few years? Let's take that to Ruth. With your work, you're resourcing people, and in Virgin Media, you're also a mum of an autistic child.
I am. And very proudly so.
Are things changing?
There's definitely change afoot. I think diversity and inclusion is a term that we're beginning to understand in society at large, and therefore it is embedding into corporates. I think neurodiversity still sits on the edge of that conversation and is not yet embedded into some of those metrics within organisations. So we see large corporates making some fairly bold statements around perhaps gender and ethnicity, but perhaps not having that broader inclusion of neurodiversity. And I think that's really important that we call that out and bring that to the table. There's a lot that needs to be done in the space, and fundamentally the term, we've already talked about it today, the term neurodiversity and neurodivergent, it needs a bit of demystifying and debunking. People aren't sure about it. And I think that a lot of the corporates who have a desire to operate more effectively in this space don't really know where to start. And there's a number of organisations and charities out there who are helping with that. But I feel we're at the start of the conversation in the corporate world.
I really hope some of those corporations will be listening in, because I think one of the best places to learn is actually not necessarily, sit with a trainer and get trained about it, but just listen in, just listen to people speak, because then you're picking up on the terminology, you're picking up on the differences, you're picking up on lots of stuff, even just listening into conversations. For you, Sarah, you are an IT consultant at Auticon. What does that mean?
So that basically means that Auticon facilitate my training and then find projects within other companies for me to work. So it's all within the IT industry, and I mostly focus on a data science point of view with the work I'm going into.
And when I was looking at your resume, I was looking at your doctorate in earth sciences, and it says her thesis was on the numerical modelling of meteoroid airbursts. Now that's proper clever. I mean, we're not just talking about a bit of singing and dancing like I do. So where do people like you work? Where is there a call for this kind of work?
So PhDs in general just teach you a lot of skills and teach you to work independently and find information and bring different points of view together and work on something that's new and like different from what other people have looked at in the past. So it kind of just teaches you that independent work and that research, whilst also mine was numerical modelling, so it taught me a lot of coding skills and used a lot of like mathematics and stuff. And it just generally gave me this really broad skill set that can be utilised by so many different companies and industries. But yeah, companies need to be open to like taking people who don't necessarily have the experience in that field, but have the skill set to really thrive. And that's one of the biggest barriers that I faced trying to find work.
What was that like for you?
So I knew I had a skill set that involved coding, and it was very logical, and that I found data really interesting. I knew I didn't want to continue with on an academic research path, but it was really hard for me to find jobs that would take me without any data science experience, because I don't have it specifically, but I knew I could thrive in that area, and I applied for many different data science jobs that I thought were entry level, but never got anywhere in the process.
Do you think part of that is because you talk there about just not having necessarily the specific skill set, but do you think you were also experiencing people being ableist with you? Was that part of the issue or not?
Potentially, but I don't think I actually disclosed that I was autistic to begin with. I presented my skills that come from being autistic, but I didn't outright say that I was autistic in an application process. And I think, so because it was during the pandemic, there was actually quite a lack of jobs. And most of the ones I found were at big companies. And I think it was a lot of, I just didn't tick boxes.
Yeah.
And actually, from a resourcing perspective, I find listening to that fascinating, because if you go out into the market and have the conversation with some of the talent acquisition leads, big data, one of the biggest skill shortages in the country, one of the areas where we see significant rise in salaries because there are just not enough of these people who are able to operate in that big data BI space. And it's certainly a skill shortage in major media technology companies like VMO2. But interestingly, the second part of what we were just discussing there is making that declaration to say, I experience the world differently, I'm neurodivergent, and actually for that to be considered an attribute for those particular skills, as opposed to the way a lot of the HR systems and the way in which assessment operates, which it gets ticked box as a disability. And there's a big problem there in the way in which we address and allow people to step forward and make a statement, because the vast majority of organisations will make that declaration in the space of disability. And I think that's a really dangerous thing to do when we are talking about particularly skill sets for the future. Data, pattern recognition, those are the very skills that large corporates are specifically setting up organisations to address and to recruit for those skills. And here's a live example of someone who would be exactly the skill set that the vast majority of corporates would want to attract, and yet you didn't feel that was something that was open and available to you.
What's your experience being Connor with this? In terms of the work that you do you feel like you're worried about disclosing your autism?
Well, so with my current work being based upon the fact I am autistic, that's never normally an issue. But going back to when I started the working world, yes, definitely. So I entered the working world at the same time I entered that discovering I was autistic phase. So I didn't have an official diagnosis. I was actually going through it. But of course, I was pretty certain at that point, meaning that it was very hard to have that conversation because people need that justification of that diagnosis paper. People are only also interested in our weaknesses, as in framing them as detriments to the workforce, as you said about box ticking, or they've got a disability, that kind of framing it in that way. We don't take the opportunity to assess everybody's strengths and weaknesses. Why aren't we doing that with every single person in the workforce?
And also, I want like a sub box in the disability bit that says, what are the assets of your disability? I think that I work across a whole spectrum of different types of disabilities, and every single person without fail has got assets that have arisen from being considered disabled.
Yeah, any of my weaknesses are normally only weaknesses because the world has made them a weakness.
Yes, exactly that.
I don't feel like I have a disability. Yeah. I feel disabled by this world because this world is very chaotic. But yeah, my working life, I started I got a small job in a finance role thing. It was just something through a family connection, and it was a 6-storey council building, which was open plan, 1,000 people on each floor, big open gap in the middle, meaning that all I could hear all day long was 6,000 keyboards tapping away. Also, it was a hot desking environment, so just got moved without justification.
No certainties.
Bright red wall as well. That one really threw me. There was a real, there were very colourful walls everywhere, and then another thing that I encountered in that first job was a barrier about understanding people's attitude to work, that working was actually a social game as opposed to just getting a task done. Yeah. I went in and I completed 3 months of work in 2 weeks, and I was told by the people around me, oh no, but you need to slow down. I'm like, but why? That makes zero sense.
Yeah. There's no logic to that, is there?
No, exactly. So I thought, why aren't I in an environment that I can just use my skills to produce a good output? Why am I having to do some kind of performance to please other people whilst doing it? It just shows how systemic all of this is as to how we're built up as a society to really not be inclusive of this range of people's attitude to work and the way that people work.
Yeah. Now, I've just noticed from doing the little bit of listening that I've done amongst you guys, you would both be considered to be late diagnosed. I think it just so happens that that's just you've just popped up in the podcast as such. But I would really love to touch on that whilst we've got you guys in the room. Sarah, do you think, well, it's the question to both of you, let's go to Sarah first, but do you think it would have been different for you? Would life have looked different if you'd have had an earlier diagnosis? What impact was a late diagnosis? What impact did that have on you?
Yeah, so I didn't get diagnosed until I was 25, in the second year of my PhD. And I'd always been different, struggled with friends, but I'd always masked a lot and blended in. No one realised I struggled. I hid it. I hated it. And I've always found pockets of places that bring me joy, and like, by not understanding that I was autistic, I didn't know why I didn't fit in, because I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And there were so many social cues I just wasn't picking up on and didn't have a clue about them. Yeah, so having the late diagnosis as well, most people in my life don't even know that I'm autistic. Like, people do, but they don't really know how it impacts me, because it happened so late that it never really got discussed. Like, it was probably a benefit in some ways, because I was never held back for anything. It made me struggle in certain aspects. So I am also mildly dyslexic, but it's more to do with how my brain works and takes in verbal information. But I always struggled with English during school, but no one realised to what extent, because I excelled at maths and science so much that I didn't need to spend any energy on doing it. So all my energy went into the English aspects. Without that additional help, things were a lot more difficult.
When were you diagnosed with the dyslexia?
So between my second and third year of my undergraduate, so I was 20, I was going through a lot of anxiety, and I self-diagnosed as autistic. Like, I had come across a documentary and then began to identify a lot with what I heard in that documentary, and looked into it a lot more. But that was in 2012, and the information out there was nothing compared to what it is today. Yeah. And being female and masking a lot, I didn't really fit the diagnostic criteria from what you can see externally. And so I went to the doctors, and then I went to the university disabilities and said that I thought I was autistic. And so they put me through the diagnostic process. And through that, I did all the testing, and I scored extremely highly on the visual information and pattern recognition side. And my verbal skills were at the 30-40% level of the general population. And through that, they diagnosed my mild dyslexia, but the psychologist I had didn't understand that diagnosing autism in women. And there's a line, time and time again. Yeah, there's a line at the bottom of my my assessment that just says I don't have the experience to diagnose women with autism. I'm not familiar enough with it. Wow. They may, you may have it, but I don't have the experience, and nothing happened from there. Oh. I got my dyslexia. Diagnosis. So that opened me up to my 25% extra time and accessing disability services. But the autism was completely forgotten about and wasn't factored into anything.
Wow.
So actually the main trigger for this was we had one lecturer at during my course, and me and him could not communicate. The way he explained information, I couldn't understand, and the way I asked questions, he couldn't understand. So my friend ended up basically translating between us, despite the fact we were speaking English. And that was second year. And then going into third year, he taught what was well known as the hardest course in the entire degree. And I knew I couldn't, I was petrified that I would fail that because I couldn't communicate and I didn't think I'd be able to understand the content. And that just really opened my eyes to, like, I needed to get that
help as well.
That help.
Diagnosis. My goodness, thank you for sharing that. And for you, Connor.
So I can look back at throughout my entire life and go, oh, there was an autistic moment. There was an autistic moment. Jokingly, my mum recognised something when I was 1.5, where I'd had what would be classed as a meltdown over the fact that I'd been given a different colour of IKEA knife that day. And she actually joked, oh, I think he might be autistic, but as a joke, and then laughed it off. And then 15 years later, yeah. So,
15 long years.
But I look in specifically in primary school. I remember. So I really do remember everything. Like my earliest memory, I was 1.5. I've got quite a detailed memory in that sense, and I remember specifically in primary school. It would get to around this time of year, actually, so Christmas time, and you'd always go to the panto, and I was petrified, unknown, etc. Nowadays it's brilliant, relaxed performances, preparation, great. But I was always the one kid that stayed behind at school and had to go and sit in another class and do the work. It wasn't picked up upon, and there was only instance after instance after instance throughout my entire life, particularly in education, that were just always written off as like one-off incidents as opposed to ever looking at the through line. It's one of those things where at the time it was only ever dealing with things that, I didn't have a label, so it was just, oh, Connor's just must be having a bad day at the moment or a bad time at the moment, let's write that off. But it was never connected together. But then I got to secondary school. I really did enjoy primary school on the whole, but I got to secondary school and I loved it. We had a timetable, a 2-week timetable, and we had very strict rules because it was quite I think it ranked quite high at the time anyway. And so there was rules to follow. There was a method to go. I loved it, and I was getting top grades and stuff. I was that obsessed with the timetable that I think it was the year 9 timetable. I managed to get in on the school website and leak early. That's how excited I was about like the routine and stuff. Yeah. I don't know why that wasn't picked up as an autistic thing, because nobody can be that obsessed with a timetable. But I did well. I did well because that environment was made for me. There were things, but again, it was always, oh, but there's something going on outside of school, so let's write that off. But I've spoken to teachers afterwards, and quite a lot of them have said, do you know what? At the moment, yeah, it was just dealing with Connor, but looking back, wow, yeah. Fair enough. I understand this is autistic. I really wish we were at the point in society, and we will get there one day, where as soon as kids are old enough to have enough comprehension to work out how they work, that we just look at every single kid and go like, okay, how best do you work? Yes. How best do you process information? How best do you communicate? Let's profile you. Yeah. And then going forward, we can always get the best out of you and make sure that you're not put in situations that are going to cause you extreme distress. Because we're built up in this, well, school specifically is still stuck in that mindset of equality is treating everybody the same. Which is not
totally different. Ruth, this is really touching on the area that you work in the workplace. So what is the company you're working at, Virgin Media, what is Virgin doing to make sure that all those people's needs can be met or recognised even? Yep.
So we're probably at the start of the journey. I think it would be unfair to say that we've landed to where we need to be. But one of the things we were really clear about when we set up the Neurodiversity Network was to say who's in our population, who's out there, who do we need to look after, who is here, who is us now. I'm really not comfortable with the way that some corporates do a tick box exercise of we need to go out and employ a certain number of X people and therefore into the resourcing team off you go and find, because if we can't morally and ethically land a community into our organisation in a way where they not only survive but thrive, then you shouldn't be doing it. And I think that there's ways in which you should do that that's sustainable and effective. And that's by asking, if 1 in 7 of our customers are neurodivergent, that means we have to adopt our products and the way that we engage with our customers. That's a complete change for us commercially. How do we speak to our employees and our people? And I think the way to start that conversation is to look internally first. So we built a network. This is a grassroots step forward. Do you want to be involved? This neurodiversity network where we come together. We actually split.
When you say neurodiversity, because that's all diversities, including neurotypical, or do you mean neurodivergent?
Neurodivergent, apologies, absolutely. Neurodivergent, but it's called the Neurodiversity Network at the moment in terms of the terms. But you're right, that's something that we need to look into. And that's a group of people within the organisation who work for us who have stepped forward to say they are either a crew member and they personally experience, or they are a carer and they are a similar life story to me. And there's some responsibility there to find out what is it that we should be doing? How can we do this? So that's been operating for about 15 months now, and we've done a variety of different things to land the education strategy that sits within that. So we've had comedians come in, we've had lunch and learns, we've had sensory parcels that we've sent out, we've done a series of sessions with external providers, we have videos that are embedded into the system, we have educational decks to share, and we spend a lot of time doing reverse mentoring and speaking to our executive committee. But
What's the response been like within the rest of the wider company, Are they like, yeah, we really want to know about this, or are they like, it's another group of people we need to know about?
No, there's a real, one of the things I'm really proud to work for Virgin Media 02 is how open that they are to saying, step forward and share your true self. And there was about a year and a half ago, just pre-pandemic, we had a series called the Belonging Series where some really quite senior people stood forward and said, this is my lived experience, this is how I experience the world. And that's why I say it's kind of a top-down and a bottom-up approach. You need those leaders to step forward and
100%.
say, this is my life, this is my reality. And the more that do it, the more that step forward and the more that community has grown. So we're 483 at the moment and growing. But I suppose the stories that touch my heart within that are where we have people in our community who step forward and say, I heard you talk, I think that might be my son, or I heard my colleague who's made a declaration and say, I think that's my lived experience, I think that's my journey, I think I need to have a diagnosis. And taking the stigma out of that conversation, enabling that language to land effectively and allowing people to say, yeah, this is a bit different, but it's totally cool, is a really important place to start. Yeah. We've got a roadmap ahead of us of some of the things we need to do around assessment and engagement of bringing staff in, for sure, and I'm going to be part of that within the resourcing piece. But adaptations at work, we're adapting the screens, we're putting different colours on some of the tools that we use, we're looking at the fonts, we're looking at using voice control rather than typing into small iPads for some of our field staff. So there's lots of things that we're actively doing, but we're very much at the start of the journey to land some of those.
That sounds like really best practice that needs to be, other people need to pick up on that and use that as a really good model for business. It sounds really good. Sarah, you're a consultant at Auticon. What was the process of being interviewed by Auticon? What happens with Auticon with you? And is that better to work through them and see what doors they can open? Or, what's the difference?
Yeah, so Auticon's recruitment process for me was fantastic. Because they have a step-by-step recruitment process laid out on the website. You don't have to fill out an application form. You just send an email, and if you have a CV, you send it too. But if you don't, that's fine. It's very much like an open conversation with them, and they want to look at you as a whole person. And there isn't an initial interview stage. They do cognitive tests, and then also, so I did a Python skills test to see where my Python levels were at.
What are Python levels? Just for people like me that don't know.
So Python is a computer coding language. Okay. So there are many different languages within the computing world that are used for different things, and Python just happens to be the language that I've done most of my work in, and so that's where my skills lie in the IT industry. So they did testing on that. But a part that I also really enjoyed was that they took into account my experiences doing the tests, not just the scores that I got. It wasn't a tick box process where most companies, you have to score above this to get considered. No, they took into account that it was during a pandemic and all these other things that were going on and how I experienced it because it was during a pandemic, everything moved online. And I was one of the first people that they had taken through the new recruitment process that was online. And they really took into account my feedback as well, and not just the score.
I love that. I love the fact that you use the word enjoyment, which is not a word that you would imagine to be used when we think about being interviewed. It's normally, I'm terrified, you know what I mean? That's a whole different experience.
Yeah, so there wasn't actually like a formal interview. After I did the testing process, they then just invited me to have a chat with Patrick, who leads the consultants on the technical side. And just, it was as much for me to find out about the company themselves and what they do as for him to find out about me. And it was very much getting to know you and understand you rather than that you just need to tick a load of answers. You weren't being
show
grilled.
up as yourself, be able to be the whole self, and people get you rather than having to. Boxes are just. I love the fact that technology has given us this ability to evidence every last detail, but it really still doesn't capture a human being. That's a whole different thing. So let's go back to Connor. What advice and top tips would you give anyone wanting to boost neurodiversity in the workplace?
Create a flexible approach. That's the opening statement, I think. It's not a one box fits all. Create a system that allows for, actually, as we were just saying about, that allows for a more holistic view as to how a person works. Something else, disregard any traditional values as such. You don't need to you don't need to walk in and judge somebody on their eye contact and their handshake. That's something that's, obviously eye contact in for autistic people anyway, it can be challenging for some. But is it necessary? That's the question. Other people don't like touch, etc. We can debunk all of these traditional values and having a flexible approach and not judging somebody for anything they need to do. Ultimately, it's likely that in 2021, 2022, in present times, we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to have a perfectly adjusted environment. That anyone who is neurodivergent coming into a workplace is likely going to have to be doing something in order to cope. Whether that's masking, whether that's stimming, which is self-stimulatory behaviour. Yeah. I got so good at not tripping up on that, and then of course I did it then. Allowing a person to do what they need to do to get through, to do what they need to do to be able to be as comfortable as possible, to be able to then show them the version of themselves that they want to show everyone, and to show their skills, to show their weaknesses.
I love the fact that you've talked a bit in the early part of that kind of flexibility. Ruth, flexibility within the workplace is sometimes really hard to find, and the irony of autistic people being called rigid and then the world around them is so unbelievably rigid is crazy. So
true. And ironically, listening to you speak there, one of the things that I see in my day job is that some of the flexibility is actually best practice.
Yes,
so
anyway,
for everyone,
you
for
get something
anyone.
Right for autistic people, you get something right for everyone.
Yes.
That's the mantra.
Really, really good example is when you are preparing a candidate for an assessment. Right? So you've done the attraction, the candidates are in process, and you're going to assess whether they're right for the job. Tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to look at. Yeah. Here's what the assessment's going to look like. This is what we're expecting to hear you say. Wouldn't anyone like to know, I know where I'm going. I know the room I'm going to be in. I know what the environment's going to be like. I know in advance who's going to be assessing me. I've got their LinkedIn profiles to have a little bit of research. I think that's really great practice for candidate experience through a journey anyway. And let's call out right here, right now, we're in a massively candidate short market across all areas of talent out there. if we can adopt some of these practices that we're seeing emerge from this community as best practice, isn't that best practice for everyone? Isn't that commercially better? Wouldn't a candidate of any background come through the process and go, I really enjoyed that experience. I knew what was happening. I was told in advance what was going to happen. I was prepared. It removed any anxiety I might have had. And I think there's so many synergies around best practice and what we could do. And the reality is, not an awful lot of it is massive adaptation.
No,
it's really quite
absolutely.
simple things. And it's thinking in advance, being succinct, being proactive, sharing the information and giving everyone the opportunity to perform to their best ability. And that in itself, for me, commercially, will create a better candidate experience for everyone.
The worst that can happen by providing expectation is that somebody can go, oh, I'm okay, thank you. And that's literally it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the only difference. I define anxiety myself as the body and mind's reaction to a lack of certainty. We all experience that. Therefore, why?
Particularly assessment, right? Anyone who
Exactly.
goes for an interview or any kind of assessment is going to feel nervous. But when we need to attract candidates, and candidates will be looking at us and other companies, if they can say, I had a good experience, they came back to me when they said they would, it was really clear what was expected of me, they're more likely to be engaged, to want to come to us and enjoy the culture because we've been upfront from the beginning and consistent, than perhaps saying, I had a really bad experience and that didn't work for me. And as with all companies, we've got a lot of work to do in that space. But personally, I think that there's a huge amount to learn in corporates around best practice in this space.
Sarah, what good experience have you had that you could say that would really work for me?
Yeah, so the big thing that I see, and want to see in companies is actively providing reasonable adjustments for everyone and not asking questions as to why that person needs it. Everybody's brain works differently, and that having to disclose, some people are really not comfortable with it. And there's also people who just aren't diagnosed. They know they struggle with certain aspects, but don't have the diagnosis. And if you reserve accommodations only for people who have a diagnosis and are really open and talk to you about it, that cuts off so many people from your talent pool that you're really not going to recruit the best people that you can.
That's such a lovely way of spreading out this idea that it goes even beyond our community. Connor, what would you say to that?
I'd say that it gives us an opportunity to be able to create almost a communication around it. Like, why don't we all have one-page profiles that summarise our strengths, our weaknesses, what we're interested in? Take it beyond the actual practical stuff. Just make it so that we can create an expectation for everybody and that everybody's personal need can be met.
And I think for the future, we might not be far off that. I think the days of the CV looking into the future may be redundant, because with LinkedIn and that ability to see, I can see where someone's worked. But a one-pager that says, here's my personal passport.
Is that your pupil passport again?
Exactly right. But if that's written by the individual who owns that information and sharing that could be the very things that we're saying, well, we can see this person can do the job, and here's the adaptations, and this is the way that we can really get the best from this person. And as you say, not having to repeat yourself, because no one goes to work for one person and has the same hiring manager throughout their career. We look at things like our grad schemes. We move graduates around every few months. Now, if that graduate needs an adaptation, they're having to repeatedly say...
Gosh, all over again.
Yeah, so absolutely, those are the sorts of things that we need to be talking about.
And there's also just some absolute beauty in somebody putting their own spin on creating an A4 piece of paper. Because if you leave that as an open field, what people are going to present to you, how they see themselves in the way that they want to see them, they want other people to see them, and that is something that is just needed.
Yeah, so companies really need to start opening up and accepting people for who they are, and accepting the diversity, and understanding what barriers people might have faced in the past, and especially being neurodiverse and things. And research has shown that at least 3 times as many neurodivergent people identify on the LGBTQIA+ spectrum, and they're already having to face so many barriers in that respect that certain neurotypical people won't understand. And then if you go and add in race and other aspects of people's...
Lots of intersections,
the intersectionality of different neurodiversity, and then your gender identity, sexual orientation, race.
Socioeconomic mobility
Yeah.
is a... Yeah,
and
different.
what people have had access to growing up, if you don't take that into account, you're not going to create a diverse workforce. You're not going to be able to get the best out of people, because everyone needs different things and had different experiences that really impacts on their lives and what they can bring.
So I've got one quick question for you both. One of the things that we've talked about in the network at Virgin Media O2 is how people have experienced COVID and the working from home and the use of laptops. And so many people have stepped forward and said, I love it. I love a mask. I don't have to read faces. I can predict my day. I can multitask for the first time, and have really thrived in the opportunity to be a home-based worker. And it's actually one of the really great news stories that's come out for us about how people who might otherwise struggle with the large open plan offices, the commute to work, the interaction on the public transport. I'd just really like to hear both of your experiences of the pandemic.
I know many autistic people that have been asking for it for years, but it's only since everybody's been forced into it that it has become a thing. Yeah. It doesn't work for everyone. Of course it doesn't, but it works for some. So again, a flexible approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the flexibility is like a huge thing. So actually the pandemic impacted me a lot because I was finishing my PhD and working independently. I lived alone. And there were so many different aspects to that made it so difficult for me, because it's a challenging time without a global pandemic. And then joining a workforce, I have been at Auticon for 4 months, and this is my first time here is meeting people in person related to work, because the work from home environment is this new thing, which for me, there's massive pros and cons to it. Like for me personally, I think I probably will thrive best doing some days in an office and some days at home. I need both aspects, and I'm trying to find that balance now. But for me, masks is actually quite a hard thing, because I actually, quite unlike quite a lot of autistic people, I communicate a lot with facial expressions, not verbal communication. And I actually lip read to help process what people are saying. And without masks, I can really, when people are wearing masks, I have to concentrate so much harder to process what they are saying versus if I can actually just lip read.
I'm with you. I don't hear well. I don't hear well, and it made me.
I can't hear at all.
Yeah,
I can't read faces. I don't know what people. I don't know. I think I don't know what they're saying because I can't see a face. So it's really interesting. Absolutely. And also we could talk forever, but just the exposure for me. It's the exposure of being on my own at home. I do a lot of writing. I really love, and it feels really safe and great. And I'm my own boss, and nobody can tell me what to do. But I think I need a little bit of interaction, or I would never leave the house again. So I think for me, it's for my mental health, I need a balance of both.
And for me, for hybrid working, I'm a mum of two young children, and clearly being a carer for Harry, having the opportunity to not have to be that mum who has to step up and run and dash back for the childminder, or get into the car before the traffic, constantly making apologies for not being at the water filter for a conversation, or be able to stay around for a chat at the end of the day. My life was very dictated to about what I was able to do. Whereas now I can pop into the office. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Like that hybrid capability. And actually my day job, this notion of who is in your team. My team is all sorts of people I work with across the business, all over the country. It's not just the people I sit next to. So that the fact that the majority of leading corporates are going to this hybrid model, I'm passionate about. I think it's fantastic.
I'm loving it. I'm going to bring it to a close now because we're running out of time. But I just want to thank you today, Ruth Rainbow, Sarah McMullan, and also Connor Ward. Thank you for chatting with me today. I think my take-homes from this are just I mean, the sheer amount of talent that's in the room, I think that's, I can't ignore. It's really incredible. But also the flexibility that is needed in order to really engage that talent. And I love what Sarah's just said there. You know, let's be even more kind with it. Let's go beyond our own community. And there are many other people who would really, diagnosed, undiagnosed, just different, who would really benefit from the level of flexibility that you've all shared today. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. Just to mention, in terms of a community preference language, all episodes in this series were recorded in November 2021. We did our recording and production at the Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London. It was engineered and edited by Billy Godfrey. Music was by the Lethargies. If you'd like to know more about the next show or would like further information about how Auticon can help, please visit www.auticon.co.uk. That's all from us this time. Bye for now.